2, 1. Hey, Bad Rasted here with a little tech tip. I want to show you exactly how to determine if you need to flash your BIOS and also help you with your configuration if you want to play Valorant. I've got on the screen here, if you notice, this is a screenshot of my current BIOS from my current motherboard, which is a B550A Pro. And I want you to look where my cursor is. See right here where it says BIOS version. And it has this string of letters and numbers, a dot followed by another 3 more letters and a 0. This is crucial. This will determine if mFlash is going to flash your BIOS or not, because everything in this string must match exactly except the suffix. Everything after the dot can be different, but everything before the dot must match exactly. Let me show you how this breaks down, okay? One letter at a time. The E stands for UEFI. UEFI BIOS. It means it's UEFI compliant. The 7C56, if you notice, is right up here. It is the model number for the B550A Pro and also the B550 Gaming Plus. These 4 letters will be your model number for your MSI board. The next letter, A, means it's an AMD motherboard, and it supports AMD processors. If you see an I here, that means you got an Intel. These next 2 letters are the most important, MS. This does not stand for Microsoft. This stands for MicroStar. In other words, it stands for MSI. When you see an MS here, that means you have a retail MicroStar motherboard. Any other combination of letters here other than MS means you have a pre-built. mFlash will prevent you from flashing a retail BIOS onto a pre-built board. So if you ever try to flash your motherboard and you don't see the BIOS update in mFlash, this is most likely the most common reason. You have a pre-built board and you're trying to flash it with a retail BIOS. mFlash will prevent that from happening. In some cases, though, MSI has relaxed this ability or relaxed this security protocol because they don't want you to misflash or cross-flash your BIOS, your motherboard with the wrong BIOS. On some Intel, current Intel boards, they've relaxed this restriction, and it'll allow you, even if you don't have an MS here, sometimes mFlash will allow you to proceed with the BIOS flash. And that's mainly because the recent ordeal going on with the well, Jay's 2 Cents has released videos on it. He's been pounding on it about motherboard makers are not enforcing Intel's voltage specifications. And since there's a lot of pre-builts out there, MicroStar is probably going to err on the side of caution and let everybody, even if you have a pre-built, flash your board. So they kind of, on certain Intel and only Intel boards that I'm aware of, they've relaxed the mFlash ability so that you can actually flash your pre-built Intel board if it's 13 or 14th gen with a retail BIOS. Now, anything after this dot, this AH0 that you see, this is the BIOS revision in hex. When you go to download a BIOS on MSI's website, they'll always have the model number, 7C56, then a small little v for version, and then 2 numbers. Pay no attention to that. This right here will tell you what your BIOS version is. This little string here, AH0. The 0, any BIOS released by MSI that is a release candidate, a release BIOS, will always end in a 0. If it's a beta BIOS, it will always end in anything other than a 0. For example, if this said AH3, that would mean it would be the 3rd revision of BIOS AH. Since this is a 0, this is a release BIOS and it's out of beta. MSI will never ever ship a board to you, whether if you bought it or not, unless some major screw up happens, and it's possible, they're only human. MSI will not ship you a motherboard with a beta BIOS on it. It will always have a retail BIOS. This is crucial because if you look at your manufacturing date, which you can determine from the UPC on the motherboard box, anything I'll have to do a separate video on that, but you can determine which motherboard at the time you buy an MSI board. You can kind of determine which BIOS it'll probably ship with, and generally speaking, especially when it gets delivered to you and you look at it and you look at that UPC, you can determine the manufacturer date. Then go to MSI's support page and compare the manufacturing date with the release BIOS dates, and you can pretty much determine which BIOS the board shipped with. Now let's move on here to the next slide, and I got to make this a little bigger. If you are going to be playing Valorant, some of these settings you want to make sure you have enabled. Especially if you have a modern processor like me. I've got the 5600. My GPU is a RX 6600. So if you got a good, you got a decent GPU and processor, you want to enable all these settings here. Now notice, I also include this so that you know exactly where to find these settings. It'll be in Settings Advanced, PCIe, PCIe Subsystem Settings. Another thing you want to realize is right here in I had when I first bought my MSI board here, I had a real bad habit of not paying attention to this arrow here. This is the back arrow. This lets you go back one menu, one level. And a lot of times what I would end up doing is I would go to settings and click something, not see it, and then click settings again instead of the back arrow. And I was always in this constant loop of going through the same, 2 or 3 menus and wondering what's going on here. Always use this back arrow when you want to go back to a previous menu. Say like if you see this PCI subsystem settings, use the back arrow and it'll put you back into advanced or PCIe or whatever. So here's the options you want to enable, even if you're not playing Valorant. Okay, even if you're not playing Valorant, these are the ones you want to make sure you got. Resizable bar enabled. When you enable resizable bar, this above 4G memory cryptocurrency mining setting will also be enabled by default. You need that to this is crucial for what is known as resizable bar by NVIDIA and smart access memory by AMD. This is a big performance increase right here. Your PCIe gen switch, you can leave these to auto, but if you ever have an issue, you can always like brute force them, like set PCIe 1 to from auto down to Gen 4. Then the chipset, you can set it down to Gen 3. This is if you have detection issues with certain M2 drives. Your lane configuration, leave this at auto because unless you're going to add in a PCIe M.2 adapter, then you might have to tweak this to make it work. This SRIOV support, that you need to enable. Data link feature I have enabled. Now right here, this ASPM control, this is a new one that was added with the recent BIOS updates. This option here you want to leave auto if you have an Intel Arc GPU. Can't stress that enough. If you have an Intel Arc GPU, make sure this is set to auto or enabled because that is required for that specific GPU. Moving onward. This is another section that you need to look into. You got to make sure that you are in UEFI mode. You cannot be in CSM mode and will have secure boot working and resizable bar enabled. It's just not going to work. You absolutely must be in UEFI mode. That means Windows 11 will not operate in CSM mode. you have to have UEFI because secure boot and FTPM. But if you're in Windows 10, make sure you are in this right here. This is crucial for Windows 10. You have to be in UEFI mode, secure boot must be enabled, and yeah. Let me go to the next slide here. This is the pay attention here. This is overclocking. Notice there's a highlight over here that tells you which part of the menu in my BIOS I'm at. So you click the OC, overclocking, advanced CPU configuration. Now, what you want to make sure you want enabled here is SVM. You want to make sure that's enabled because that is a virtualization setting, and you might need that enabled in order for Windows to use core isolation. And there was core isolation and something else. I have to bring up my security settings here. Let's see. Let me Windows. There we go. Security. There we go. Let me launch that here. Account protection. Right here, core isolation. You look at core isolation details, memory integrity, and kernel mode enforcement stack protection. This can only be turned on and used if this option here, SVM mode, is enabled. So you're going to make sure you want that. And Valorant, I'm pretty sure it needs that too. Let's move on to the next slide here. And this is another one that's pretty important. Let me enlarge it here. This is where I'm at. I'm in Settings, Security, and Trusted Computing. This is where you find your TPM 2.0 device. All you should have to do here to make Valorant work is right here. Security device support enabled. Just turn that enabled, then save and exit. You should be good. All these other options you can turn and tweak from their defaults. They don't matter too much. Valorant should work without it. You know, this is a 2.0 device, so you should be okay. And that'll probably, that'll do it. That's pretty much it. But yeah, I just wanted to take a moment and walk you through some of these BIOS options and make sure you know what they mean. That way you can get on with gaming and get your system in tip-top shape, and especially the BIOS part. Yes, this right here, the string, and making sure that you get the right BIOS for your board. That's the most important. Anyway, thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.